Welcome to the Emotional Horsemanship Podcast. I am your host, Lockie Phillips, and I help deeply caring equestrians create emotionally balanced horses with science, empathy, and feel. This podcast is a safe place for anyone who desires a better future for horses and for the equestrian lifestyle. I hope that you will enjoy these solo and collaborative episodes where we enjoy a deep insight into our horses' worlds and ways in which we can make that better for them. If you love horses and are willing to do right by them, you're going to love this podcast. And I thank you for being here. My guest on the podcast this week is Temple Grandin. In this very special video episode of the Emotional Horsemanship Podcast, I cannot believe that I have the honor to introduce her to you. Temple Grandin is an animal advocate, an animal scientist, and behaviourist. Temple is one of the world's foremost voices on the living experience of autism and neurodivergence. She has had a multi-decade career in animal welfare and animal sciences. Temple revolutionised the design of meat processing facilities with the welfare of the animals in mind and has been instrumental, often single-handedly, in improving livestock handling practices within the United States and around the world. Because of Temple, tens of millions, if not billions by now, of animals around the world have walked to their humane slaughter or human consumption without fear, pain, or rough treatment. In my opinion, if animals could offer a Nobel Peace Prize, she would have it. In 2010, Temple was named by Time magazine as one of the world's 100 most influential people in the category of heroes. She has a Double Helix Medal for her contributions towards awareness and funds for human health in biomedical research. She has multiple honorary degrees from multiple universities. She has been inducted into the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame, the Texas Hall of Fame, and the Hall of Great Westerners of the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum. She has a Meritorious Achievement Award from the World Organization for Animal Health, has been inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the National Women's Hall of Fame. She has a Doctorate of Veterinary Medicine from Kansas State University, and she has appeared across major media, including, but not limited to, Primetime Live, The Today Show, Larry King Live. She has appeared in Time Magazine, People Magazine, Forbes Magazine, and the New York Times. She has been the subject of multiple documentaries and the subject of a biographical television film entitled Temple Grandin, where she was depicted by actress Claire Danes, and it was nominated for no less than 15 Primetime Emmy Awards, winning 7. Beyond being an omnipresent figure in multiple books written about animal welfare, animal sciences, and the human food chain and autism, she has also written 27 books and still writing more, and she has published more than 60 peer-reviewed scientific papers on a variety of animal-related subjects. Temple is a hero of mine and someone whose work I have studied extensively. She has inspired my journey into new ways of training horses from an ethical and welfare-driven perspective and from the animal's perspective. Her books are both enjoyable and richly informative. Temple was happy to offer me an hour of her time to appear here on the podcast, which we recorded in her kitchen. It was my honor to speak with her, and I hope that you enjoy this conversation. There we go.
Got it.
We are recording. Temple Grandin, it is my pleasure to have you on my podcast today. How are you?
I am just fine.
It's such a pleasure for me to meet you, and I'm so happy that you agreed for this time together. So thank you very, very much for making the time.
It's great to be here.
Thank you. So I'm going to jump right into it. My first question for you is, how has your autism helped you to understand animals better?
Well, I am a total visual thinker.
Mhm.
Everything I think about is a picture. And when I was young, I thought everybody thought in pictures the way I did. I didn't know that my thinking was different. And it was kind of a shock for me to learn that it was different. But it helped me with animals because all animals live in a sensory-based world. What is it seeing, hearing, smelling? And all the memories are going to be sensory-based. And I tell people, if you want to understand an animal, you need to get away from language.
Right. That's fantastic. So you were born nonverbal, right? It took you several years to develop language.
Nonverbal till age 4. And in fact, some brand new interesting research has just come out that shows that language is not required for thinking. You can think without language.
Well,
and
you've known that for years.
In my recent book, Visual Thinking, I actually have a chapter in here on animal consciousness. But I provide the scientific research that different kinds of thinking exist. And the people that are visual thinkers are often very good with animals. They also are good with mechanical things because they can just see how it works. Then you have the more mathematical mind. They think in patterns. And then, of course, you've got word thinkers. And one of the things about word thinkers is they tend to overgeneralize.
Oh, yes, they tend to overgeneralize. What is your understanding of kinesthetic thinkers? Because I know some people think in feelings and in movement patterns. Do you have an understanding of that?
Yes, and I'm not one of those. I was a bit klutzy, but I can see in a lot of sports, you get into a kinesthetic pattern, and no matter how hard I tried, I wanted to be able to ski, keeping them together like this. I could just never do it. My balance was just terrible. Found out my cerebellum is undersized. So I could never get really good at a sport, but I can totally understand how the idea of the kinesthetic.
Right. I used to be a professional ballet dancer before my career with horses. And I discovered through reading your works that not only was I a visual thinker, but I was equal visual and kinesthetic. So my brain works in I see movements and I feel in pictures, if that makes sense.
Yes,
I feel
that does
pictures
make sense.
and I see in movement.
That makes total sense.
Thank you.
No, I totally can understand that.
Right. So when do you first remember making a connection or an understanding with an animal, a specific animal?
My really big work with animals started when I was a teenager with horses. My whole life revolved around horses. I was bullied in school, and riding horses was one of the few places where I could get away from the police. Thank goodness back then there was no way I could be texted on a phone.
Right.
That did not exist. And I had friends with horses. We showed horses. My school put me to work on taking care of the horses. I cleaned 9 stalls every day. And from that, I learned how to work. I'm seeing a lot of autistic kids today. They're not learning how to work.
Right.
And that's a different skill than academic work. You got to get the job done. I had 9 stalls every day to clean, and I had to do them every day. I had to feed each horse the correct amount of feed, make sure I closed the grain box. That's very, very important for horse safety. And I think about responsibility. I'm seeing the big lid of the grain box coming down, turn the metal latch. So a horse absolutely cannot get into it.
Right. Yes. So you remembered connecting with horses first.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
And this brings up another important thing. Students have to get exposed to things to get interested. And the cattle interest all started as a teenager, visiting my aunt's ranch. How could you find out you would be good at ballet dancing if you hadn't been exposed to it?
That's right.
How could you find out you'd be good at playing a musical instrument? I was horrible, but I was exposed to it. And I'm thinking too many kids today aren't getting exposed to enough things to figure out what they can be really good at and what they really would like doing as a job.
Right.
I worked with, and I discussed this in visual thinking, I worked with a lot of autistic people. They owned steel fabrication shops. They invented equipment. They patented equipment, even though they didn't have a college degree because they couldn't do higher math. Owned the steel shops. And now that kid that we would need building things, fixing elevators and stuff like that, is playing video games in the basement.
Right.
People I've worked with retired out. I am finding broken elevators everywhere I go now. No, it's really getting to be a problem.
Yeah.
There's nobody to fix them.
There's no one to fix them because neurodivergent people are not getting exposed sufficiently to different interests so that they can develop their passions and develop a career around it.
And what's happening is they're getting addicted to video games. And I don't see any of them going into a career in that industry. I'd have a much more nice view of it if they went into careers. And the other problem is artificial intelligence is going to take that over. So I'm watching that very, very closely right now. I read all the business magazines. So I'm going to push the hands-on fixing an elevator or working with animals because those jobs are not going to get taken over by AI. It's just that simple.
Yep. We've already got the right people for the job, and it's people of neurodivergent capabilities and talents. They're the perfect people for those sorts of jobs, don't you think?
Well, I'm kind of a NASA fan, and I visited the original control room for the moon landings. And I saw it 7 or 8 years ago, and they kind of let people play in there and wreck it. It was kind of sad, but it's now been completely refurbished, and nobody's allowed in there now. You go in a gallery, and then all of a sudden, all the screens light up, everything turns on. Mission Control is talking to the astronauts, and you see that famous video coming down on the moon. It was so cool.
That is so cool.
You know what? The elevator was broken.
Oh, no.
We walked up 5 flights of stairs. And then the control room they use now, we also saw that one. They walk up 4 flights of stairs.
Wow.
That was 2 weeks ago.
Wow. Fantastic. Well, Temple, in your understanding, because I know you have a very primary interest and a long career specifically with cattle, but what is the primary difference between handling cattle and handling horses in your understanding?
There's a lot of things that are similar. Horses are more flighty. That's one of the big differences. But the same kinds of things scare them during handling. You can have a show steer, for example, and you bring him into the show and he's terrified because he'd never seen a flag before. And that's something where you need to introduce them to flags. And one of the best ways to do that with horses and cattle would be to decorate the pasture with flags and let your animal voluntarily approach that flag. I don't care if it's a horse or a cow. Don't go shoving it in their face. That is not the thing to do. Let them approach scary things. Bicycles can really scare. Put a bike out in the pasture, let them go up to it, gradually get them used to it. Now, one of my students, Megan Corgan, did a very interesting study in the paper's open access online, has a title something like Reaction to a Complex Rotated Object in the American Quarter Horse. I don't know why the reviewers wanted American Quarter Horse in there.
Well, they love quarter horses and they get more funding if it's for the American Quarter Horse too, perhaps.
So I had to put American Quarter Horse in the title. But what we did in this study is we took a children's play set that's about that has a little slide and a little swing in it. And they walked young fillies and colts. They were trained to lead, but they hadn't been no training for riding yet, past this play set until they no longer stopped. It was all done at a walk. No longer stopped, no longer did this, no longer flared their nostrils. And when you turn the play set, it became a new object. Think about it. Okay, here's the slide for the little child to go down. This position. It looks totally different.
It looks different. Perspective.
It became a new object. Where we, being more verbal, go, yeah, that's a kid's toy.
We generalize.
We have this category called a kid's toy.
Right.
A horse doesn't have that.
Right.
And I repeated this experiment. We got just informally with a big plastic green chair, really big, weird green chair with people riding quarter horses, everything done at a walk. No, all I wanted to show is it became a new object. We did everything at a walk, otherwise it would have been dangerous. And I had them just ride by the green chair until they no longer stopped, no longer looked at it. Then I rotated that chair 90 degrees. Half the horses did a hard stop. And if that had been done at any gait faster than a walk, the riders would have fallen off.
People misunderstand their horses all the time because they don't understand how they think.
Well, that chair is a different picture when you rotate it.
Right.
I really, really like this paper. It was done by my student, Megan Corrigan, and one of our faculty members, Sarah Matlock. Boy, they had a hard day walking all these colts and fillies past that thing. But it's something I've been talking about for a long time. Nice open access paper. You can search for it under my name, horses, on Google Scholar. But what it showed was that this place set thing became a new object when it was rotated.
So interesting.
Think about a car. All right, this little thing here, this is the little vehicle I learned to drive on. But think about it, that looks different in this position.
Yes.
Than in this position.
Yes.
So even with vehicles, it's important to make sure they see the vehicle all around, new things. I saw something that could really scare a horse, and it was a Western saddle that someone had put it up on its horn so the fleece underside showed. Well, if you approach head on to that, it doesn't even look like a saddle.
Right. Looks like
it looks
a dead
like
animal.
Something totally different.
Yeah.
Or if you take that saddle and put it on the fence, like riding a horse, the horse would know what that is.
Yes.
But I go, wow, that bright fleece, and they made sure that they always had a pad so that fleece stayed clean. So that bright white fleece, that saddle tipped up on the horn, that's getting ready to scare a horse.
That brings me to my next question. Because you're speaking about objects now and how objects have different pictures to a horse or to a livestock animal when they are in different positions. How does that relate perhaps to body language? Because humans, when we're training a horse, we are an object, just like the play set or the green lawn chair or the Western saddle, but we're not standing still, we're moving all the time. How important is body language to grazing animals?
I think it's really important. Also, humans have intent. I always tell people not to yell at animals because it has intent. And animals also can learn to fear certain people that are bad. There was a horse, I wrote about him in my book, Animals in Translation. I call him the black hat horse.
Yes.
And during a veterinary procedure, somebody had chucked alcohol in his eyes, very bad. And the person who did this had a black hat. And this horse became terrified of black cowboy hats.
I didn't know that horse had alcohol
really
in
terrified.
his eyes. Yeah.
White cowboy hat, fine. Black cowboy hat, scary. And if I took that black hat and I put it on the ground, it was less scary. But then as I took it and I raised it up closer to my head, the horse, I could feel it tense up and getting ready to rear.
Visual thinking.
And the problem with these fear memories is they can be difficult to get rid of.
Right.
Very, very difficult.
Very difficult.
And I can't eliminate black cowboy hats at a horse show. There's no way. U.S. You're going to get rid of black cowboy hats. But there's other situations where I can get rid of the thing they're afraid of. And one of those is different bits. At least in the U.S., the jointed snaffle, that's the beginner bit. And if a horse has been abused with a snaffle, the rough training, then he's learned jointed bits are bad. And I have the students hold a straight bar bit and a jointed bit in their hand. They're different feeling pictures. Because I've heard quite a lot of stories where you get rid of the jointed bit, replace it with a straight bit. It's like a new file folder, no longer good. And we have a horse training program called the Right Horse, where they take rescues and they rehab them. This horse was frothing at the mouth, and we got rid of the snaffle. We found a bridle with a straight bit. He calmed right down.
Not a problem.
It was like a new file folder, and his brain had opened. And it worked. I just couldn't believe how well it worked. So I can control bits. But I can't control flags. They're going to be around. And we need to be working on getting animals habituated to lots of different things. Let them explore them. Don't shove them in their face. Another issue now we've got is drones. We had a very stupid news photographer totally frighten two of our horses, really frightened them. They were all dressed up in their Western tack. We were supposed to ride them. I see the drone up in the air, and the horses were rearing and everything. And I'm going, we're not riding those.
Mm.
And I've been saying for years, it takes 20 minutes for them to calm down.
Mm.
Once an animal gets really frightened, it
20
takes
minutes.
20 minutes to calm down. I timed it. It took exactly 20 minutes. Well, then we went to ride them. This idiot takes the drone like a plane coming in for a landing and goes right straight at us. How stupid can you get?
Right.
If you just park a drone up in the air, that's usually okay. But it was a very dangerous, very stupid thing that this news photographer did. But and it's not an experiment I'm going to repeat. But it was a good teachable moment. I use it in my class of what not to do with drones.
Right.
You know, you need it if you just let them hover up in the air. Usually that's okay. And if you then slowly put the drone down, cattle and horses will look at it. Like, for example, here's some shape right here on this magazine. The picture was taken with the drone.
Yeah, they're looking up at it.
They're looking up at it.
Yeah.
Because
That's lovely.
I've seen cattle at our experiment station do that. It's just coming down very, very slowly like this. And so they'll just look at it. But if you go like this,
they'll run
that's
away.
real scary.
So sudden movement. Interesting.
Yeah. Sudden horizontal movement. It's real scary.
Sudden horizontal movement. In your book, Animals Make Us Human, which was such an important book, you wrote extensively about specific emotional systems such as panic and fear.
Yes.
In fact, you were the first researcher and expert that I ever came across that spoke about the blue ribbon emotions that were described by Jaak Panksepp. Actually, Temple, because of that work in Animals Make Us Human, I went on to study Panksepp extensively. And now I have a passionate fixation, you can say, on the emotions of horses. It's my specialist subject. And I teach on this subject now all over the world. But
good.
Yeah, my question for you is, on the subject of animal emotions, when did you first become aware of the neuroscience and the research in science around animal emotions?
Well, it started out before I'd learned about Panksepp. I wrote a paper called Assessment of Stress During Handling and Transport, mainly at cattle, and I found the old studies on the brain systems for animal fear. And none of that information had been put in the animal science or the veterinary literature. Back in the 90s, when I first became a professor, I wasn't allowed to use the word fear in any of my papers. They made me take it out.
Really?
And put it in agitation. But in this paper that I published in 1997, I went over to the neuroscience research and found all the old studies that were done on fear, that this was something real. Then a little later on, I learned about Panksepp. And I think that he really makes sense. And you can look at a lot of behaviors. You have fear. Then you have aggression. Okay, the bull comes after you on the pasture. That's
rage.
Aggression.
Yes.
Then you've got separation distress, panic. That's different than fear. Separation distress and fear are not the same thing.
What is the difference between panic and fear?
Well, they probably feel pretty much the same, but let's take in sheep, for example. If you separate one sheep from the other sheep, that lamb will be just going crazy. You get the separation distress when you wean cattle, and all the calves are mooing, and that separation distress. Fear, something sudden movement or something like that can make cattle scared. Then you have the seek emotion or exploration, and there's been some research in cattle where some animals will go out and graze a lot of pasture. They're big explorers. They may also be called bold and shy. There's other animals that don't go out and do much exploration.
Right. And
then you have the sex drive. Then you've got mother-young nurturing. That's the oxytocin system.
Right.
And then you have play. And these are all based in the brain. And then you can sometimes have complicated ways where things are mixed together.
Right.
Now, one of the problems we're having today in looking at emotions is if you use a functional MRI machine, for example, on a human, you'll have a whole network light up in the brain, like maybe on fear. But you don't know which node on that network turns the network on.
Mm-hmm.
It's very difficult to tell. Now, these old experiments were very invasive. They were not nice experiments.
No.
But they'd go in there and just destroy the amygdala, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And that take out fear. We don't need to repeat these experiments.
No.
But what they showed is that when you do this, it showed that you can remove fear if you just burned up the amygdala, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some of the neuroscience research right now is showing, the amygdala also has some positive circuits in it, but overall it's more the negative stuff. Because you destroy the amygdala, you'll have an animal that doesn't have any fear. The rat will walk right out in front of the cat,
right?
Which normally it would not do.
There was some interesting research in Panksepp's work of lab rats that had never met a cat, but if they put the smell of a cat inside their cage, they showed fear behavior. That it was in their DNA, it was in their instinct. There's also some,
I think, a fear of snakes too.
Snakes.
Like
there's also there's some recent research, very, very recent, and I don't know if it's peer reviewed yet, Temple, but there's some recent research that points to fear behavior occurring in animals or people that have problems with their amygdala. So they've even shown that sometimes fear doesn't rely on the amygdala. So that the research is kind of continuing in my understanding of it.
Okay, well, that's right. But these emotions are real things.
Mm-hmm.
And like now in studying temperament research in sheep, for example, you need to tell, are you measuring separation distress
or
are you measuring fear?
Mm-hmm.
If I take a single lamb and I put him in an open field test, he might be reacting more to separation distress than sort of this fear of exploration.
Mm.
And this is now beginning to get kind of figured out in the animal temperament research. And I have an article in a chapter in my textbook on livestock handling and transport on this. That's in my livestock handling and transport book.
Is that the same book as Humane Livestock Handling with Mark Deasing?
No, Humane Livestock Handling is strictly a cattle handling book.
Uh-huh.
And then I also have a new book, the Grandin papers, where I've taken all of my best research articles and I put them in this.
Oh, fantastic. That's great.
And
I need to pick that up.
It's available in Kindle. You don't want to ship that heavy book.
Temple, how has the scientific community at large developed in the last 20 years, particularly in their understanding of animal emotions?
Well, when I first started as a professor 34 years ago, I wasn't allowed to use the word fear.
Right.
And in my Grandin papers, I've got a book in a paper in there where I talk about agitated behavior in cattle, because it made me take the fear word out.
Mm.
Now in the last 10 years, we're allowed to use the word personality now.
Right.
Over 10 years ago, that would not have been allowed.
Yes.
But I think the Panksepp motions really, to me, make the most sense when you look at a lot of behaviors. And I don't know why more people aren't picking up on the Panksepp emotions.
Mm-hmm.
But I can look at a lot of behaviors and kind of go, now, which emotion is that? That behavior working on? Or maybe it's a mixture of the emotions.
Right. A combination.
But to me, Panksepp makes a lot of sense.
Yes. Thank you. I'd love to talk more about humane livestock handling.
Okay.
That book really changed my life. It actually changed my diet. I decided to stop eating meat unless I was eating meat that came through a facility you had designed, and or had a contribution in its design. Temple, how important is the design of a facility that a grazing animal lives in? How important is the facility design?
Well, these facilities in humane handling, not handling facilities.
Mm-hmm.
Cattle are not living in them. They're using them at the slaughter plant, using them for veterinary work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And having those facilities is important. But you can also, if you have good management and some basic things, have decent cattle handling and maybe some less fancy facilities.
Right.
The thing I'm learning is people want the thing, some magic thing more. Now it's artificial intelligence.
Right.
Magical thing more than just the good management where you pay attention to all the details. I call it wanting the thing more than the management. And when I first started out, for the first 10 or 15 years of my career, I thought I could build cattle handling facilities that'd be self-managing. No, there's no such thing.
Doesn't exist.
There's no such thing.
Yeah.
Good cattle handling facilities make it a lot easier to handle. I'd rather have good cattle handling facilities than bad
ones. But you need good
handling.
Sure. Good people.
But it is possible in some pretty basic facilities, if they're well maintained with non-slip flooring and don't have huge mistakes in the design, to have good low-stress handling in those facilities. But it took me almost 15 years to change my mindset on that after I got a lot of equipment out in the industry, and some people tore it up and wrecked it. And then the thing that made it change was when I was hired by McDonald's Corporation, Burger King, and Wendy's to train their people on animal welfare auditing, and we just swept through the industry and made them fix things.
Love it.
And what I learned from that is I was very careful not to force equipment on them, to figure out how to fix existing facilities. We took some pretty shabby beef plants and we made them work. Now they had to do some repairs. They had to do a lot of management supervision, but we made some shabby old places work with just repairs, non-slip flooring, changing lighting. Cattle don't like to go into the dark. And we made them work. Now, I would not want to copy these facilities. We've got a plant right now with a really horrible stockyard. They got a beautiful, nice curved ramp I designed, and a dreadful stockyard. And they've got no space to expand it because they're hemmed in by a river, a road, and a railroad track. And you don't move a mainline railroad track.
No.
Their handling is beautiful. They've taken that horrid yard and they figured out how to handle cattle in it. And I stand up on the catwalk and I watch it and I go, man, the morning shift, they are just so good. You see, that's management. Now, I would never want to copy that yard. It's dreadful.
Right.
But they have made it work. But there are certain things where it's so badly designed it won't work. Like, for example, when an animal gets his head right up to the entrance of the single file race, they've got to be able to see up their two body lengths. Now, the plant has a really nice curved ramp going up to the stunner. That's really nice. And that works just great. But the rest of the pens is just a cobbled together mess, and that we can't fix it. There's no space. They just have to live with it. They have to schedule their trucks really, really tightly to come in every 15 minutes. So you don't have trucks waiting. You see, now that's management, scheduling your trucks. And they got a really good non-slip floor. The unloading ramp is real nice. That part is good.
Yeah. Can you explain how you came to discover the phenomenon of curves in cattle and the curve phenomenon of livestock chutes, and why do these animals respond so well to curves in spaces?
Well, I have to admit, I did not totally invent curves. In the early 70s and the late 60s, there wasn't curved facilities built. And I went around every feed yard in Arizona and a bunch of feed yards in Texas, and I worked cattle.
Let's take a break. I have spent most of my adult life researching horses and everything that there is to know about them. And that research will be going on for the rest of my life. Temple herself had a huge influence on my research, and I've taken a lot of this research and then put it to work in the field, went out there and just put it in front of any horse I could find and just kept tinkering with it until some patterns started to emerge. Through these patterns, I presented these patterns to other people with horses, and through doing this and then presenting it to my horses, over time, just like a long-form scientific experiment that I never gave up on and committed all of my energies to. No friends, no family, living on the other side of the world. This was all that I was doing. I came across some patterns, and these patterns became techniques, and these techniques became a way to train horses. Inspired by the lady, the wonderful, wonderful hero I'm speaking to now, came through into a method of training. And if you'd like to explore that method of training with me, I'd like to invite you to come and learn it on the Emotional Horsemanship Foundation online course. To sign up for the Emotional Horsemanship Foundation online course, navigate to emotionalhorsemanship.com. From there, if you click on the Online Courses tab, the very first course underneath that tab is the Emotional Horsemanship Foundation course. Click on that, and there's plenty of information here that explains the course to you, shares some reviews, and gives you a bit of an insight into what we're teaching there and why. If you click the buttons here, it takes you to the sign up page. This course really represents, in my view, a change on horse training. We're moving away from maybe the strictness of classical correctness, and we're moving away from some of the more brutal methods that many of us are not interested in practicing. And it's now time for things like non-escalating pressure to have their heyday, unintended. So if you'd like to join me over there, we have more than 1,000 students. It's a very established course. I'd love to have you there. Come and join us. And with that, I'd like to take us back, more importantly, to this fantastic moment with Temple Grandin and the curve phenomenon of livestock shoots, and why do these animals respond so well to curves in spaces?
Well, I have to admit, I did not totally invent curves.
Mm-hmm.
In the early 70s and the late 60s, there wasn't curved facilities built. And I went around every feed yard in Arizona and a bunch of feed yards in Texas, and I worked cattle. And sometimes a curved chute worked really well. Other times it would not work. And I figured out, where there was design mistakes. So what I did is to figure out how to make designs that would work every time. Because there were some curved chutes laid out completely wrong. They did not work at all.
Mm-hmm.
Because they had dead-ended the single file race.
Mm.
And the cattle, when they came up to the entrance, couldn't see a place to go. That does not work.
Mm.
But there were some curved facilities. But what I did is going to perfect the designs, take all the good bits, throw away the bad bits, publish the layouts.
Mm-hmm.
You see, one of the things that's sad in a lot of engineering stuff
Copyright
is things just get lost.
Mm.
And you don't want to copy the really atrocious designs that did not work.
Mm.
And so, and I did a lot of writing about my stuff. And I published designs and designs that worked really well.
Mm. Mm. Have you found that this curved idea applies to other livestock, such as pigs, sheep, and horses, or is it primarily in cattle?
Well, sheep, it definitely applies. Now, all of these animals want to go back to where they came from.
Right.
That's a natural behavior, wanting to go back to where they came from. And one of the things in pigs and cattle, in working with the slaughter plants and also working with loading a truck, is getting people to handle small groups. This is a very, very important in pigs. You move like 6 up at a time. Maybe you move, like loading a truck, 4 pigs up at a time, moving small groups. Sheep are such a strong follower. You can move those in kind of continuous flow. That doesn't work with cattle and pigs.
Mm.
Also, when you put them into the area that narrows down to the single file, you want to time your bunches so you have space in your single file. And the plant that has the bad stockyard's got plenty of room in their single file.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can wait for it to get half empty. Then when you bring up your next bunch, they immediately walk into the single file. Because if you fill up the crowd pen area, when there's no room in the single file, they just turn around on you.
Mm.
Yeah, so timing bunches is one thing that's really important to teach people. And that people think, well, we got to just fill the whole thing up, jam it full.
Mm.
No. I want the alleyway that leads up to it and the crowd pen to be half empty most of the time. And that's a hard thing for people to get their head around that.
Mm. If you were to, I want you to imagine you're meeting someone who is designing a ranch for a horse or some horses, and they've got a blank piece of flat land and they've got a budget. What would be your top 3 suggestions for such a person?
I want to make sure they've got, ideally for horses, I want pasture turnout.
Pasture turnout.
And enough of it.
Enough of it.
So
How much do they
out
need?
Of the stalls.
How much do they need?
I think that's one of the most important things. Then some people are doing these track systems where you put a fence around the pasture and it gets them to walk.
I've got one of those.
My students I've She told me that she had a horse that colicked all the time, and when she put in the track system, made him walk more, and he stopped colicking.
Yes.
But what I think is really bad in horses is some of these fancy horses, they're just living in a stall.
Why?
And they might get lucky to get turned out in a little tiny area outside. And horses don't get a chance to be horses. And in Animals in Translation, I wrote about crazy stallions that keep locked up. Well, if you go out and you watch Mustangs, he asks her nicely if he can breed with her. Some of this behavior that people think is normal in stallions is just crazy behavior.
It's not.
And then animals that are reared by themselves are often nasty fighters.
Right.
Because they've never learned the give and take of social relationships. I have been in places like where they might have 50 stud horses, stallions, in a pen, and they're all getting along. People don't realize how that some of these fancy horses, just how abnormal some of this behavior is.
Yes. Why? Why do you think people keep horses in boxes or stalls? I don't. But why do you think people do? Do you have an understanding there?
Well, sometimes, we have horses here, and then we got 2 riding facilities here, therapeutic riding facilities. One of them, we've got some limited pasture. The other one's in town in Denver. Yeah, they have stalls. But one of the things that they've been doing is they'll take 2 out at a time, and they teach the horses that bumping the ball around is really fun. Now, this has to be done carefully, so they're not afraid of the ball. But I've seen these horses that are like really sedate therapeutic riding horses that little kids ride. And they're out there rearing and bucking and bouncing that ball around. And they really are having a good time. And they put them in the big arena 2 at a time and let them do this. Because it is in a city and they don't have turnout. But the arena is big enough that they can go at a full gallop and rear and jump up and down and do all these behaviors they never would do when you're riding them.
Right.
But they do it when, but you're going to have to, the thing you need to do something with the horse. You can't just keep it in the stall and just have it do therapeutic riding.
Right.
It's got to have some time to have some fun.
Yes.
And I've got a picture on my phone. Let me see if I can find that, of one of the horses having a really great time with the ball. And see if I can find that here quickly. I don't know. But we've got to do things to help an animal to have a better life.
Why? Why is that important, Temple?
Well, it's a conscious being. You see, in the past, in looking at animal welfare, we concentrated on preventing suffering. We make sure they're not lame. If it's dairy cattle, we make sure they don't have sores and lesions on them and things like this. That's things that we do. But now in animal welfare, we get to thinking, does this animal actually have a chance to have a good time, to have a good life, to basically have some fun?
So that's how you see animal welfare has changed. Animal welfare culture, human society has changed.
Preventing suffering, we have to do that. It's essential.
Right.
But it's not sufficient. And
it's not enough.
This is the work of David Miller with the 5 domains.
Right.
That we have to also let the animal have a chance to have some positive experiences.
Okay.
I'm looking down, I'm trying to find.
Yep, you keep finding that picture of that horse playing. So can I ask you another question while you're doing that?
Yes.
So if in the past the priority in welfare was that the animal was alive and not in pain and not suffering, and now we have a development in culture to that the animal needs to have a good life.
That's right. Does the animal have a chance for a good life?
Good life. Do you have a prediction of what the next level in welfare development might be?
Well, I mean, some people might say, well, maybe we shouldn't ride them or race them or do any other thing. Well, I think we can do these things, but I'm also, another area I'm very concerned about is breeding.
Yes.
Like I've got 2 papers here I downloaded yesterday on heart failure in racehorses. They just drop dead all of a sudden. And I'm very concerned both with pets and with horses and with cattle and dogs breeding problems that cause severe animal welfare issues.
Okay,
Whether it's a bulldog that has difficulty breathing, a racehorse is having a heart attack or just breaks its leg. We've got problems now with hoof abnormalities in cattle, and these things are related to just breeding
indiscriminately.
That's not the picture I'm looking for. That's just a horse. But I'm very concerned that we're breeding a lot of problems. And recently I saw an X-ray of a cat that had a deformed leg with a joint that ripped apart. Why are we breeding some of this extreme stuff? Another thing I absolutely hate are these extreme Arabian horses, where they're breeding them so extreme that they look like seahorses. They're breeding for a super extreme dish face. And I think this is really horrible. I think I can get some pictures of these up on my phone.
Yes.
Right now. I'm breeding for extreme traits, and people think that's pretty. And I've shown these horses. Okay, like here are some of them right here.
Yeah, that's sick.
Yeah, I get this up on my phone, and I show it to most people, and they just think it's hideous.
So why do people do it?
Here's more of them here.
Gosh. Why do people do it?
The keywords extreme Arabian horse.
Wow.
Those are the keywords that I use. And the pictures come right up, and they're extreme. And most people that I show those to on my phone think they're horrible. Just most regular people.
Why?
And then you get like people like the pugs with the pushed in faces. They think they're cute. But it's not cute when they can't breathe. It's not cute when they have trouble eating because they've been bred so flat. Now, I'm not suggesting not having pugs. What I'm suggesting is let them have just a little bit more nose. Back off just a little bit on the extreme trait, and then you won't have a problem. But people get into what I call bad becoming normal. And they don't realize how messed up it is. But these horses, I mean, I just type that in my phone. I show that to people on my phone. Most people think they're horrible.
Yep.
Just regular non-horse people.
Yep. Do you understand why? Have you ever asked breeders who breed for extreme traits why they've bred for these extreme traits?
I don't think they realize they're doing it. We've had an issue with legs in cattle, with problems with what's called corkscrew foot in cattle. With that, I think I can find a picture on my phone right away where you have a twisted toe and you're just breeding for a real high weaning weight. And now that animal's on a tilt table right there, and you can see that he's got a twisted toe. That's a 4-month-old heifer.
For a high weaning rate.
Heifer, and it's got a twisted toe. That's genetic. Now, what's happened there is they're just breeding for high weaning weight. And the problem is these problems happen slowly. It happens slowly. I call it bad becoming normal. And people don't realize how messed up it is because they only see their own animals. They don't look at other animals and go, oh, well, that foot's really messed up. And these things have slowly gotten worse.
Crept up on us.
And I talked to one of our top breeders 10 years ago about that, some of his cattle that I thought they had horrible feet and legs, and he told me to get lost. Well, I'll tell you right now, 10 years later, we're best buddies now.
Yes.
He's realizing now that I was right.
Yes.
And he is now breeding for feet and legs.
Good.
But 10 years ago, when some of the problems with foot and leg conformation first started in cattle, he told me to get lost. But then when the problems got worse,
he came to you.
Then he finally realized I was right.
Yeah. I remember in one of your books, it's a story that stuck with me for many, many years. I probably read it about 10 years ago and it stayed with me. You told a story how pigs for human consumption used to be rather fat and pretty docile. And then in the 1980s, low-fat diets became the fashion.
That's
We started breeding for lean pork to increase profits. But at the same time, something else happened to these low-fat pigs. Can you explain what happened at the same time?
They accidentally bred an aggressive, hyperexcitable, awful pig that fought more, that would suddenly, if you shook the gate of the pen, rear up, screech, go berserk. And I don't think they realized they did this because these breeders only saw their own animals. They never saw any other pigs. But I was going over to the old John Morrell plant. This would have been late 80s and early 90s in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And this is a company, especially back 30 years ago, that bought pigs from lots of different places. So you'd go into their stockyard or their lairage, and you'd have one pen of pigs from Farmer Joe, another pen of pigs from Farmer Smith. And so you had all these different kinds of pigs right beside each other in the pens. And when the new hybrids came in, it was obvious. Tail bites, scratches all over them, shake the gate, and they'd go crazy, rear up, screech, and flip over backwards. You go to the next pen, no fighting, shake the gate, they wouldn't even get up. Anybody who went in that plant could see these differences. But the problem is the breeders never saw.
The breeders don't saw the differences.
And I remember having a conversation one time with the breeder, and he says, "You're not a geneticist." I said, "I have one qualification you don't have. I've seen your pigs and more different kinds of pigs in adjacent pens next to each other than you've ever seen."
Right.
That's the one thing that I have. And it was so obvious when you went in the plants and you saw them beside each other.
And so what solutions would you recommend to breeders who breed for extreme traits? First, or obviously, they have to realize that they're doing it and they've caused a problem.
They have to realize they're doing it. Now, let's look at poultry. We were breeding just for a giant breast, and the birds were getting problems with back damage, problems with lameness. Okay, first of all, you measure your animal welfare outcomes. Lameness, I can measure that. Leg conformation, whether it's chicken or cattle, I can measure that. And the broilers we have now, in terms of having leg problems, are much better than the broilers we had 10 years ago. The chicken industry has done something to correct it, and they have a short generation interval, so that makes it easy. But one of the new developments I'm really happy about, and I do have to disclose, Costco pays me well. I have to disclose them. Are Costco chickens. I've got to disclose the financial interest here for that. This is the one animal where there's legitimately, they're putting 2 graduate students through school. So
good.
That's a pretty big financial interest. But I'm on a Costco rotisserie bird, that's a signature product. I want to try to figure out how to have less problems. And they did something really innovative. They took the high performance hen, broiler hen, but better to a more kind of old fashioned, not a total slow growing rooster, but a little bit of an old fashioned rooster. And they got a really interesting bird. They ended up getting less breast meat, which they needed, but more leg meat. And the bird is, less death losses, doing a whole lot better. Unfortunately, due to avian influenza, I wasn't allowed to see the new rooster because of there's really concerns about avian influenza. But I got to see the bird in the plant after it was all defeathered, and I go, "Wow, look at those legs!" And a lot of people in the chicken industry thought that was stupid. No, I think it was brilliant what they did.
I remember in one of your books,
and a lot of people in the industry, well, that's a stupid old-fashioned rooster. Why would you want to use that now and breed that to that high-performance hen? No, it's the right thing to do.
Yes. I remember in one of your books, you were discussing your work that you had done with cattle, with pigs, with horses, with sheep, but you, at that stage in that book, you regretted that you had not made enough progress with poultry because you had not been able to demonstrate profits for better handling of the poultry. You just described some improvements in breeding practices around poultry, but have there been improvements in handling poultry?
Well, yes, there's been improvements. Also, the other thing that drives improvements is big buyers inspecting it.
Right.
That also drives improvements. And I talked about that in Animals Make Us Human, where Wendy's made a big effect on, because they had like 22 complexes that provided chicken to them. And I remember going out in the very first chicken farms. This was 1997. It's a long time ago. Oh, it was just terrible. It was terrible. You had total bad becoming normal. You'd have a bird with the legs sticking out like this, and they'd go, "Well, is that lame?" I go, "Yes."
Yes.
Yeah, that's totally not acceptable. And they were kind of just clueless. And they were doing things like cull baby chicks. They were throwing them in the trash alive. And one of the first things I did for McDonald's is we got rid of that in a hurry. But it was almost like they didn't know any better.
Mm.
You know, they didn't realize how awful it was.
Mm.
And for the most part, things have gotten a lot better because you can measure outcome variables: death losses, lameness, leg conformation, foot pad lesions, hock burn, and breast blisters. You can measure those things. They're easy to measure. You get breast blisters if the litter is wet. Litter condition is really, really important. And the birds get so heavy, they just sit down all the time. Well, I can measure that. There's some very nice outcome variables in chicken that's really easy to measure. And, I would say that they've gotten better because the problem with going back, the total slow growing bird, here's where we might get a conflict with sustainability and animal welfare, is it takes 15% to 20% more feed to feed the slow growing bird. Ooh, let's say I got 4 big, huge tractor trailers full of grain at a truck stop. Okay, now a 5th one pulls up. That looks pretty bad. And so going back to the slowest growing birds is not an option. But what was brilliant, what Costco did, is they bred to a bird that's just a little bit old fashioned, a little slow growing, and breed it to the high performance hen. I think that was brilliant.
Fantastic. I'm so happy to hear.
Luke that was responsible for doing that.
Well done, Costco.
I did not think of doing that, but I think that's a smart thing to do, because then what you're doing is you're backing off just a little bit.
Yes.
And you now get more meat on the legs. So in terms of total meat on the bird, it's about the same.
It's about the same.
No, leg meat's good too.
Yep.
You see, we had gone completely overboard and crazy
about breast
on just breeding breast meat.
Yes.
You see, this bad becoming normal. And then you get the Arabian horses with the face. Right. Some of these horses, they're hideous.
They can't breathe.
No, I think it's just hideous. And the dogs that can't breathe. Yes. And a cat that is a dwarf, naked cat, with a leg that's like this and the leg joints all messed up. I have problems with breeding animals that are not functional.
Yes.
I really object to that.
Yes.
And I'm going to bash on the pets just as bad as bashing on the farm animals, because some of the pets lately are horrible.
Yes. Yes.
Why are we breeding that? We had dachshunds when I was a child.
They didn't look like they did.
But the neighbors did. They were fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
They were perfectly functional.
Yeah. Temple, I'm going to start rounding out our conversation with 3 questions that I like to ask all of my guests.
Okay.
The first one, I call it muck out with me. It's a visual allegory. I know you're great at visual thinking. So,
oh, yes, I'm now seeing myself cleaning stalls right now.
That's it. So imagine that the domestic animal industry is like a stable that needs to be mucked out. What would you like to muck out from the pet world, the livestock world?
I'm very concerned right now that we've overselected cattle for some production traits. We've got bad congestive heart failure problems now, bad problems with leg conformation. It's gotten really bad in the last 10 years, but I'd like to stop breeding these extreme horses.
Yes.
Pugs that can't breathe.
Yes.
All of these things where we're making a non-functional animal. I've been in this industry for 50 years.
Right.
And for the first 25 or 30 years of my career, I've worked on improving handling in cattle. But now we've got some animals where their feet are so messed up and their hearts are so messed up.
You can't handle them.
They're going to be very difficult to handle.
Right.
We got the slaughterhouses really fixed. They were going great right in the mid-2000s. And then we started getting all these awful lameness problems.
Right.
Which in the past, I would have never forecast.
Oh, my goodness.
Some of the bad problems we have now, that we'd be getting heart attacks in cattle. Actually, there's a scorecard that you can look up online for scoring swollen hearts at the slaughterhouse. And about 4% of these animals, and this is published research now, are in late-stage congestive heart failure. Yeah, of course they're sluggish and they don't want to go up the ramp.
Right.
No, we need to stop breeding it. It's just that simple. And some people have traced it back to single sires. We just have got to stop breeding this. This is single-minded trait selection. You know,
So
we've got racehorses now that are dropping dead.
dropping dead, just dropping dead.
Those papers.
Yeah. So in your opinion, breeding practices is the next frontier in development of animal welfare?
Yes, because we're getting animals now. How can I handle animals nicely and calmly if they don't want to move?
Right.
If they're so sore, they don't want to move.
Right.
The latest paper that just came out, normally it wouldn't matter whether I hauled fat cattle 50 miles or 100 miles. Well, now if you haul them 100 miles, they get lame.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's because they got messed up feet.
Mm-hmm.
I can assure you 10 and 15 years ago, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between the cattle you hauled 10 miles or you hauled them 50 miles. You wouldn't be able to tell the difference.
You couldn't tell the difference.
No, you would not be able to tell the difference. This is one advantage having been around for 50 years. Because you get young people coming in now, they don't realize how messed up this is.
They don't see it. Yeah.
I don't see it. I was talking to one young student just the other day in cattle. I said, I can remember when we had 0 deads in the yard and no lame cattle.
Right.
Then not that long ago. Well, they don't realize how bad it is. I look at this and I go, this is horrible.
Yep. It's a disaster. It's like a slow motion disaster.
That will move, I can handle.
Yes. Yes. It's the same problem in horse training now. There are lots of congenital diseases being uncovered in domestic horses that have been highly bred for selective traits, and good trainers are finding it harder to remain gentle with quality handling because these horses need more and more pressure, unfortunately, to get going at all because they're dealing with diseased systems. So I absolutely agree with you, Temple. Absolutely.
The same thing with the cattle. I mean, these hearts are just horrible. And this paper, 34% of feedlot cattle at this one gigantic feed yard had swollen hearts, and 4% were in the late stages of congestive heart failure. They managed to walk into the plant before they died, but barely.
Barely.
This is bad becoming normal. And so, of course, it's going to make the handling more difficult.
Right.
You're seeing the same thing in horses.
Yes.
Now, what congenital things are you seeing
more
that make the training harder?
Yeah, that's a great question. More and more osteopathic diseases, so malformations in the skeletons of horses, specifically in the neck bones and in the first few thoracic bones of horses, which is
spine is getting messed up.
Spine is getting messed up, which is a primary area for horses who are trained and ridden because they have no collarbone, no bony attachment of their front limbs to their torso. They rely upon the structural integrity of this area in order to be ridden and trained comfortably. And what we're discovering is 40 to 60% of domestic horses are born with malformed bones in the lower neck and in the thoracic spine. Afterwards,
and what trait are they breeding for?
Size.
Okay, well, we got the same thing in cattle. We've got more congestive heart failure in the big
larger
animals.
Cattle.
Larger cattle, it's a real problem. And then they're too big to fit in the trucks, and they hurt their backs coming out of the truck.
Right.
We've got some problems. We have stricter height limitations in the U.S. than you do, because of low railroad bridges, and we're stuck with the trailers we have. I think the solution is breed an animal that will fit into that trailer.
Breed smaller animals again. They're also selectively breeding for faster growing horses that at ages 2 and 3 look like a mature 10-year-old horse used to look like 10 years ago. So fast growing, large horses with flashy movement and hyperflexibility.
Well, that's what we're doing. We're doing the same thing to the cattle.
Right.
Exactly the same thing.
Right.
Now, we're not breeding for the hyperflexibility. Now, I think in rodeo bulls, they're breeding for hyperflexibility, and they don't know it. Because there's people that, because some of the bucking moves these bulls make
is unnatural.
I don't think Granddaddy's Hereford could do that.
No.
But the same thing, heavier at a younger age. We're doing that in cattle. It's the same kind of thing, and traits are linked in ways you can't always predict.
Yes.
Okay, we're breeding for weaning weight, and then you get a twisted hoof.
You can't predict that. You can't predict that, can you? No.
And a twisted hoof is going to be sore to walk on.
Right.
And so whether you haul them 50 miles or 100 miles, or let's say 100 kilometers or 150 kilometers to go metric, You have differences in lameness. 10 years ago, it wouldn't have made any difference.
Right.
And the slaughterhouses are the same distance away. That hasn't changed.
Yes.
They're still in the same places. The feed yards are in the same places.
Yes.
It didn't matter on these relatively short hauls how long they were on a truck. But if you've got bad feet,
they can't go there.
It would make a difference.
Yes. You've spoken today a lot about bad becoming normal. I want you to imagine for a second we reverse that good becomes normal, almost like filling a bucket very slowly, one drop at a time. So
I think a lot of good has become normal on handling.
Okay.
I've really seen a culture change in that.
Nice.
Really good. I can tell you, like our slaughterhouses got really good. And then you unload cattle there that don't want to walk. That makes it very difficult to handle them. And then people are hitting them and tail twisting.
Going back to bad
but
handling.
But I think that handling culture has changed. There's been some really good improvements. Our beef association has lots of classes and workshops on low-stress handling. Now, there's still some people that are completely awful.
Right.
But I would guess 85% of the industry or so is really getting a culture of improved handling.
Nice.
Which is really good, but now we're getting animals
that you can't handle.
That you can't handle nicely because their feet are sore, or their muscles are sore, or they're tired because their heart's given out.
Right.
Going to make them hard to handle.
Well, I want to thank you for contributing towards the change in improved handling. I would just personally like to thank you because, in my opinion, you have made an extremely large, valuable contribution to that issue over your career. So I'd just like to thank you for that.
Well, thank you very much. And the handling has gotten better. And what's been discouraging to me, especially in the last 10 or 15 years, is the amount of cattle we've got now that have stuff wrong with them.
Right.
That makes them very difficult to
handle. Yes. Same with horses, Temple. It's the same.
I'm interested that this is going on with horses, too.
Exactly the same thing.
I will send you an email. The low stress training, and it's difficult to do as the horse is sore.
It's the same thing. I'm going to send you an email after our conversation with some of the papers around some of the research that's coming out around horses, because I think it would definitely interest you to look into it a little bit more. But
I might end up, I'm doing a paper right now on stuff wrong with cattle. And those references, especially if they're scientific papers, going to go right straight into my
your research,
into my cattle paper I'm working on.
Very good. I'll send you.
Sounds like the same sort of thing. When they become bigger at a younger age.
Yes. Same thing is happening to horses, and horses are now having some of the similar congenital malformations that cattle have are now showing up in horses. So specific issues that are occurring in cattle are now also occurring in horses. Well, the thing with the horse
and the shoulder,
right?
But the cattle, where some of the issues, it's the foot. It's the foot. The
we have hoof issues in horses too.
Walk on these feet.
We have hoof issues in horses too.
But the thing that's similar is bigger at a younger age.
Yes, that's the trait.
And we're doing that to the cattle. Because a big, huge, in the 70s, we'd have big, gigantic cattle. You might have a steer that weighs 2,000 pounds. That's a gigantic steer, but he was a 3-year-old, not a 2-year-old.
Right.
That's the difference.
That's the difference. Wow. Temple, I've got one last question for you today.
All right, that's just fine.
I'd like to describe to you a feeling, because I think in feelings and feel in pictures, but I have a feeling in my body that I describe as feeling at home. It's like coming home after a busy day at work. It's a feeling where you feel comfortable, relaxed, and happy. And I find this feeling around my horses, my animals, all the time. It's what I look for as a metric of success in riding and handling horses. Do they feel comfortable, relaxed, and happy with me? So my question is, Temple, do you feel this feeling too around horses?
I sometimes have things
around animals.
We've been working cattle in a squeeze chute. We're vaccinating a whole bunch of cattle. And I found I could, get them to just go into the squeeze chute really calmly. And I've gotten that feeling. Then something would go wrong, like some stuff spilled.
Yeah.
Or something happened. And then that kind of broke the spell.
It broke the spell. Yeah.
But I have had that.
You have had that feeling. Do you feel it regularly around animals?
Yeah, a lot of times I do. I find there's cats that nobody else can touch that let me pet them.
Yes. Yes.
Oh, this brings up another thing. Don't go like this on your animals. That's hitting. Stroke it.
Yes, stroke them.
This is hitting. I see people do this on horses all the time.
All the time, yeah.
This is stroke it. Maybe go, this is what the mayor does on the withers.
Right. Yes, yes. Well, Temple, I've really, really enjoyed getting to know you a little bit more today. I'm looking forward to sharing with you some of the studies that are coming out about breeding
practices. I'd like to have those studies, and I think they're going to end up in my cattle paper.
Great. I'll send them to you.
Okay.
Thank you so much for your time. I wish you a great rest of your day, all right?
Well, thank you so much, and it's been wonderful talking to you.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah, bye.
You've been listening to the Emotional Horsemanship Podcast. I am your host, Lockie Phillips, and that was my guest, the legendary Temple Grandin. Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to learn more about Temple Grandin, I've included her website in the show notes. And if you'd like to learn more about emotional horsemanship, go to emotionalhorsemanship.com. It's worth being said that you can find Temple's books anywhere good books are sold, and you can go to Google Scholar.com and research Temple Grandin horses, and all of her peer-reviewed papers will come up for you. Thanks for listening. I hope you'll consider to come back again next week. Take care.